Last week, of course, I made a video about 5 things that I think Gran Turismo could learn from Forza, both things to perhaps try or things to avoid. And it's only fair, of course, to flip that on its head this week to do the opposite. 5 things which Forza could learn from Gran Turismo. So, just like last time, this is a mix of things which they could learn in a positive sense, and maybe some things to learn in not necessarily a full-on negative sense, but things to be cautious of, at the very least. Now, first of all, we're going to jump straight in with something that you might not be expecting, because this is definitely something that I've criticised Gran Turismo for, and that is prize spins. Now, in Gran Turismo, prize spins are just that, and although they're trying to kind of have the vibe of Gran Turismo 2, 3 and 4 with the prize cars, especially in Gran Turismo 3 where you'd have the 4 different prizes spinning around for winning a certain race and you'd be annoyed that you just spent another endurance only to win the same car over and over again, Gran Turismo still has its own problems with that. In Gran Turismo 7, for example, there is no universe that you can tell me that it is anything close to random when pretty consistently I always win the worst possible thing out of the 4 daily spins, with almost no exception. On the other hand, the reason why I'm saying that this is something that, despite those thoughts, Forza can still learn from Gran Turismo on, is because ironically, I actually find Forza goes completely the opposite way. And this is where a game like Horizon, because I am counting both Motorsport and Horizon, in a similar way to how I would count a Gran Turismo open world game as well as a normal title, so this goes for all games on either side. The Forza Horizon, especially in number 5, I've noticed it more than ever, just showers you with so many prize spins and so many roulette wheels that it actually ends up tying into another point that I have to make in a second regarding the individuality and the value of vehicles, but we'll touch on that more in just a second. For now, I think that there's a balance that needs to be drawn between the two. Forza gives you way too many things way too easily, and you end up having either too many vehicles or perhaps just vehicles which you don't care about because you didn't actually put the time into winning them. It's cool initially, but you end up being showered in so much stuff that by definition none of it really seems to have much value. It's something which I've said for years in real life, which is the best way to make someone not grateful for something is to give it to them for free. When you work for something, you appreciate it more and you value it more, likewise in a game. The balance between the two, I think, is genuinely somewhere in the middle. Forza gives you too much, and it gives you things that are sometimes too often seen. Gran Turismo, on the other hand, swings toward the end of, especially when GT7 first came out, way too many things that were reliant on the luck of the draw, such as fundamental tuning parts, which you were not allowed to buy at that stage. Now, thankfully, they fixed that. I don't know if they always planned to fix it. I could fully believe that that was a test run to see how the community would respond, but I was never on board with the idea of stuff like engine swaps, carbon drive shafts, etc. being prize spins rather than purchasable things, because it's just an inherently unfair idea. Why should one player be allowed to have this mystical engine swap, a pretty basic thing in real life if you know how to do it, whereas another player just doesn't have access to that? It simply isn't fair. Thankfully, they've changed that, so like I said, the middle ground is somewhere in between. The reason why I am still going to say that Forza can learn from Gran Turismo, though, is because I think the lesser frequency of the prize spins on Gran Turismo makes them feel a little bit more valuable. Even if the prizes themselves aren't always the best, having less of them, such as 1 per day or for special occasions or special events, it makes them more valuable. It makes them something that you actually look forward to, whereas honestly, for me at least in Forza Horizon as a prime example, I couldn't care less about the spins most of the time, and once you've got the majority of the top 10 OP vehicles in the game, either from buying or winning them, it doesn't really mean much after that point. Point number 2 ties into something which I touched on just now, and that is individuality. At least that's what I'm going to call it. Now, specifically, this refers to cars in the sense that I'm using, and this again is something which happens more so in the Horizon series, but it does happen in the Motorsport franchise as well, and this is why I keep saying that Gran Turismo is in very clear danger of falling into this same trap, and that is the individuality of vehicles is lost when they can all have the same engine and the same swaps, and roughly the same performance in many cases. Now, this is something which did not start in Horizon. It actually started before that with a couple of things such as seemingly arbitrary limits on the performance of vehicles. I remember playing online in Forza 4, for example, that's Motorsport 4, back in 2011, and pretty much the quickest you could go in the game was about 270 miles an hour. There was no particular reason for that. That was just where pretty much every top tier car topped out, from the Bugatti EB110 to Veyron Supersport. to a Hennessy Venom GT, and even to an SSC Ultimate Aero with standard power or with fully upgraded power, they would all pretty much end up at about 270. Now that is a small microcosm of what I'm talking about, because it means that you've just taken 6 or 7 really badass, very unique vehicles. Each one of those, from a Koenigsegg to a Bugatti to a Hennessy to an SSC, those are just 4 radically different approaches to the idea of a hypercar. A Bugatti Chiron or a Veyron is nothing like a Hennessy Venom. They are commonly rivaled, but they are actually nothing alike. Likewise, if you compare a Koenigsegg to an SSC Ultimate Aero, they have similar performance, but they are nothing alike in terms of how they achieve it and what the goals of the company are. So when you arbitrarily have vehicles with roughly the same performance, just to keep things quote-unquote more fair, it undermines using one of them over the other. It makes them interchangeable. And stuff like engine swaps, drivetrain swaps, which I've said can definitely be used in a positive sense, and I expected that to be a bit more of a controversial take that I had, and it seems like it may have been from some comments, but even more so, engine swaps absolutely ends up feeling, as I've said before, kind of like road trip adventure. If you end up having what essentially amounts to the same chassis, engine and drivetrain, but with just a different body, well then you're fundamentally undermining each car. If you imagine, for example, if my favourite car in Forza Horizon 5, the MG SVR, which is barely ever featured in racing games, if you imagine that in Horizon 5, wherein, let's be honest, there's absolutely no reason really to use that car, there's nothing it can do that any other car in the game can't, but imagine that dropping in Gran Turismo. Well, chances are, at least to begin with, it would have no drivetrain swap and no engine swap, and yet I would be so happy to see that car featured in incredible detail, with so much care and attention put into that vehicle, with hopefully its own sounds. It is Gran Turismo, but hopefully its own sounds, its own physics, its own little slot in the game, and even though we don't necessarily have as many events as we'd all like to use this variety of vehicles, the love and the care that goes into the car itself is undeniable, for the most part. That individuality is something which Forza definitely needs to get back. They used to have a much better handle on that, but in this quest to include everyone and to make everyone's taste feel valid, I think that Forza has kind of gone a little bit too far on that. The next thing actually, funnily enough, ties into that yet again. Quality versus quantity. Now this one, I'm actually going to say is not necessarily a case of one being better than the other. See, both have their merits. Quality is great, and quantity is great. Sometimes a good deal will be something that you can get more of for a certain price, even if it doesn't taste quite as good. Taking food as an example. On other occasions, you're willing to wait a bit longer and pay a bit more for something that's a higher quality, but you savour it more. Again, to refer to the world of food. Likewise in a game, if, for example, a car in Gran Turismo takes longer to craft, to get the sound right, the physics, etc., but then when you finally have it, the community as a whole is over the moon about it. Let's consider the Lexus LFA, for example. People were clamouring for it, they're super happy with how it looks and sounds and feels, even though it's no way near the most useful cars in the game, no way near the quickest of cars. Now compare that exact same car in Forza, who cares? You know, it has its fans, but like the MG for me, there is absolutely no reason beyond you just like it to use the Lexus at all. And it certainly doesn't appear to have the same level of craft put into it. It feels like, let's say it as it is, just another car. And to me, that is a massive shame, because if you look at the lineup, and forget if you like Forza or not, forget if you prefer Gran Turismo, just step back and view this objectively, look at the list of manufacturers in a game like Horizon 5, look at the kind of ultra obscure stuff which we would kill for in Gran Turismo. Ford super vans, stuff like these ultra rapid electric vehicles which some of us don't care for, but some of us definitely do, like the Neo EP9, etc. These really specific, really niched vehicles. The MG that I already mentioned, even of course a vehicle close to my heart, the 62 Lincoln Continental, which was recently brought back from, I believe, last being seen in the Forza Motorsport 4 days. These picks we would absolutely adore to have in Gran Turismo, and even more mainstream stuff. So there is a mix of having that quantity, having so many cool things, but then balancing that with Gran Turismo's approach of quality, where each vehicle feels so beautifully crafted. There is a middle ground. Gran Turismo, I believe, if they had more people, or maybe managed their time slightly more effectively, whatever the case may be, could maybe sacrifice a tiny bit of quality or just increase their personnel and have more quantity. On the other hand though, Forza could use what I assume is a larger amount of staff, I think, to perhaps have slightly less vehicles, but improve the quality on those vehicles even more in terms of the realism, the looks, the sound, and making them feel like they actually do matter to be in the game. So like I said, I do not think this is a clear occasion where one game is categorically better, because both definitely have room for improvement, but as far as when it comes to making each vehicle feel individual, like I said in the last point, and also having that quality versus quantity debate, I think that Forza and Gran Turismo, to be honest, could do well to learn from each other. But when it comes to quality, Forza could definitely take a page out of Gran Turismo's book when it comes to that attention to detail. The next one might be controversial, and initially it doesn't necessarily seem like a positive thing, but I actually think it is. And again, much like all of the other points, and in the other video as well for that matter, there's balance involved. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. Make us want the game. Stop producing Forza games every weekend. Make it feel like it's an event, and it will be an event. Make it feel like game number 247 in the series, which hasn't really changed anything from last time, and don't expect the same level of clamour. Some fandoms will still have that level of clamour. Unfortunately, those are delusional people, the kind of people who play the, Madden games, for example, even though they are absolute garbage from what I can see. Having a game feel like it matters more, well, like I said last time, I believe it was in that other video, if you make something interesting, give people a reason to find it interesting, and they will. If you act like it's just another product on the production line, then far fewer people will initially have interest, and here's the crucial thing, even the people who do have interest will probably drop off of the bandwagon more quickly. So having that slight absence, which I think is actually something that Forza is trying to do, so good on them if I recall correctly. I think they have said that they're trying to space the games out a little bit more. I could be wrong there, but I seem to recall reading that or hearing it somewhere. If that's the case, then that definitely addresses this point. Gran Turismo, I think, again, is kind of on the other end of the spectrum there a bit, where there are huge gaps sometimes between games, but at least with Gran Turismo, with the smaller staff, the incredible attention to detail, sometimes being far too ambitious for their own good, or at least Kaz is, does result in each game feeling like more of an occasion. Even the games that we end up not liking as much, for example me with GT Sport, or perhaps for some people not really caring for the PSP game, etc., they do still feel like events when it comes out, because it's made to be an event, because there is that gap, that absence making the heart grow fonder, because of course the opposite to that is familiarity breeds contempt. And a lot of people, I think, misunderstand what that should mean in practice. It doesn't mean that you hate someone that you're with. Familiarity breeds contempt essentially means that if you're around something all the time, you start to take it for granted. If you have a Forza game every whatever, well then of course it's not going to mean as much. And I think that spacing that out is something that could really benefit them. And also it would actually tie in quite nicely to the previous point, because it would allow them more time and have less crunch to actually put that higher level of detail in. It seems to me like they kind of tried to do that with the latest motorsport title. For full exposure, I have not even played it though. The marketing didn't grab me at all. It looked like basically GT Sport for the Xbox, and I just had no interest in it. I hear very mixed things at best, mostly negative, so it seems like I dodged a bullet there. But still, the idea of taking a bit more time and maybe even trying something new, good or bad, you have to make some mistakes to find some gems. And then my final point is actually a relatively simple one. And this one I'm going to call don't overdo it. And what I mean by that is actually a much more basic thing. And that is, to me, there's a fundamental difference between someone who, let's take talking to a kid, for example. Let's say you've got a young child, or if you observe another parent with their young child. Observe how certain people will speak to, for example, a toddler or a little kid versus how someone else will. Some people will speak to a kid as if they're dumb. They'll baby talk to them, they'll try and dumb everything down, they'll say things as if they assume that the kid doesn't understand what they're saying. Then on the other hand, you'll have someone who speaks to them like they would to anyone else, and then clarifies something if the kid clearly doesn't understand, or if they need to perhaps have something explained in a different way. To me, that's the difference between Gran Turismo and Forza. Now, as I said last time around, Kaz had to be brought around to kind of make the game a bit more approachable, from what I recall. And that was as far back as GT1. He wanted the game to be, as I said in the last video, I believe, more hands-on, more like pro level, more mechanic plays game kind of approach. So again, you can easily swing too far the other way, but I think Gran Turismo has mostly done a pretty damn good job of being accessible enough so that many of us, even myself when I was like 6 or 7 years old, still absolutely adored Gran Turismo 2, even though compared to any other racing game at the time, it was way more intense. You've got spring rates on suspension and tuning your diff and all of these real cars and comparing specs, and you know, back then in a game where money wasn't necessarily easy to come by, you had to consider how you wanted to spend that money because it was just gone once you'd bought that car and it turned out to be a mistake. So it treated you with the respect to respect the game. It was a mutual exchange. Forza, at the moment for example, and to some degree this has kind of always been there, but some of it I think you can attribute to the graphics and the console at the time, I do find strays a little bit into the colouring book territory. And this is nothing to say about the graphics themselves, I just find that some of the Forza games, and especially if you look at some of the more recent titles like, I think it may have been Motorsport 6 or 7, I don't recall which, and definitely from Horizon 3 and onward, if you look at the menus, the layouts, they're very game show host-ish. Everything about the game and its layout is very loud. It's popping colours and sound effects, and everything's like a piñata. Everything's a clown. Everything's over the top, as if it's trying to give you an epileptic fit if you have it or not. It's so in your face. It's so childish, almost, and that's a bit of a weird tone to take. On the one hand, you could say, well, it kind of makes more sense with their target audience, it's a less serious game, it's more of an arcade, more of a street racer, but not really. If you look at Horizon 1 and Horizon 2 even, they didn't feel babyish. They had bright colours and they looked vivid, but the game treated you with a level of respect. The later ones seem to have become more and more dumbed down, more and more babying, and even to the point of earlier on with wheel spins and stuff and price spins, it almost feels like a baby shower going on all the time, just being showered with gifts to make you like the game. And that's just not a way to appeal to most adults. So to me, kind of just tone it down a bit. And I think the motorsport titles tend to do a better job of this anyway, because they do tend to have the more, pro approach, if you will. But even then, I see elements of that still kind of creeping in, and that's not to say that I'm criticising my point from last week, because one of my issues that I said about Gran Turismo is I think they could take a page out of Forza's book in increasing the fun factor. And of course, what is fun to one person will naturally be different to someone else, and what one person finds to be too childish, too colourful as I described, will not come off that way to someone else. And of course, that's a massive balancing act and a juggling act and whatever other euphemism you want to use for it when you're trying to appeal to vastly different audiences. But if you think of it this way, again, to reference my own channel, and I'm certainly not saying that I'm the standard, but just to show that this can at least be attempted, on this channel, I don't make videos for any particular demographic. If you think about it, I don't speak in a way that appeals to kids, but I don't speak in a way that would alienate them either. I just speak, and I present the information in the way that it kind of naturally falls into. I don't make things overly colourful or poppy or TikTok-ish, but I also don't make things in a way that people who don't know anything about tuning would be completely lost on. There is a middle ground, and if even I can do that working alone on a channel that just makes stuff about games, well, surely the people making those games with the money, the experience, the talent, the huge teams, well, of course they can do it. They just need to think about how and have a bit of a game plan. Like I said, it is a very subjective one there, and some people won't be bothered by that at all. But to me, it's this kind of trend that I've seen happen in a few different games, and the first time I think I really noticed it was actually, I think in the Colin McRae Dirt series. It really stood out to me how everything was very in your face and like pop art-ish, and everything felt like it couldn't keep your attention for more than 3 seconds. It was kind of like the proto-TikTok in some kind of ways. But yeah, it's a subjective one for sure, but I think that Forza could do well to maybe tone it back a little bit. There's nothing wrong with bright colours and vivid imagery, but when you make the whole game feel like every single waking moment is a party, well then nothing is. If you didn't watch the other video of what Gran Turismo can learn from Forza, then obviously they are designed to be partner pieces to each other. Once again, I'd love to hear thoughts down below from those who love Forza. Maybe you haven't tried Gran Turismo before. Has this perhaps encouraged you to give it a try? And of course, if you agree or disagree, or especially if you have additional things which you think Forza could learn from GT, drop it down below. And of course, if you are new to the channel and would love to see more Forza content, well, there are entire playlists dedicated to pretty much every game in the Forza series from the first one until now, and most of my retro stuff now is in the members section of the channel. There are now over 20 exclusive videos on there, including a lot of Forza stuff. You could even do it as a one-off thing for £2 and get access to all of the videos if you wanted to. So something to consider, but even if you don't want to, there's still loads of free ones on the channel anyway. So I'll see you next time with more, and for now, thanks for watching.